There we go. And okay, so Anne will get us started as chair of the Blue Wave Task Force as part of our Blue Wave efforts to elect Democrats in Republican-held areas, something we've been doing for many years now and something we do quite well, in a large part thanks to Anne. Anne, over to you.
Thanks. I was waiting for you to unmute me. It is my very great honor to introduce one of my favorite speakers, David Pepper. David is the former chair of the Ohio Democratic Party, and he's so many other things. He's a lawyer. He's an adjunct law professor who teaches election law. He's a former elected official, and he's an author who has written political thrillers and, as many of you know, very important books on the erosion of democracy. David, we're so glad to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so nice to be with you. I wish we were in person. I enjoyed our visit. I can't remember when that was now, but it's great to be back at Zoom. And thank you for all that you're doing. We're obviously getting close to the election, 26 days to go. There's a lot to talk about. A couple things I'll just say, and then we'll just go to questions. You know, hopefully you have my attitude about this, but sometimes it's easy to get sort of whiplash from the polling. And just to start off, my view on polling is when there's a not so good poll, believe it, because it's a reminder that we should take nothing for granted and we can lose. And when there's a good poll, believe it, because it means there's a path to victory. And so I know that apparently there were some polls today that had people down, and I don't want that to, overwhelm people's emotions. Yeah, this is a close election. We could very easily lose it. But it's also close that if we do our hard work, we can win it. So just hopefully that keeps people in the right frame of mind. I'm someone who doesn't like to get, pushed back and forth too much on the polling. Hopefully others are the same. So what I want to share with folks today is some of what I would have talked about. And if you're on my Substack, you see me talk about, and that is the complete battle for democracy beyond beating Trump. Of course, we have to beat Trump. I think we have a good opportunity to beat Trump right now. I think that since the switch to Kamala Harris, we're seeing good signs in many of the states we have to win. Some are very close, but overall, there's a path to victory against Trump. But the thing I try and emphasize, we actually beat Trump in 2020, but we didn't pick up a single state house. And as a result, the places that we didn't gain power in because we thought only beating Trump was sort of the way to save the day, those places continued to attack democracy. They're the people who did phony audits in Arizona. They're the people who are depriving water from voters in Georgia. They're the people who gerrymandered Ohio. They're the people doing all sorts of crazy things in Missouri and Tennessee. And the big picture is in North Carolina. This is a state that's borderline blue, but we're in the super minority there. We have to see, and this is what you would have heard me if you were at the meeting I spoke at, we have to see that the battle for democracy is not only about winning the presidency or even federal offices. Those are necessary, but not sufficient. And so in the coming 26 days, as much as we need to win at the top, the real victory will be if we carry it. I know you're working on this, and I love that you focus on areas that are often overlooked until we start. And I think this cycle, we could do this until we start focusing and making gains down ticket. Even if we win our federal goals, it's sort of like a finger in the dike while they're still attacking democracy at the state house level. That is I write about these books. Their front line in the attack on democracy are state houses. And if we don't contest in more state house districts and more state houses around this country, even if we win the federal stuff, they're still winning their battle. And the good news is that people are waking up to this in a way that when I wrote the first book, Laboratories of Autocracy, especially, it wasn't happening yet. One of the things, if you look at this book over my shoulder called Saving Democracy, one of the things I focus on a lot is how many uncontested races we have allowed to just keep moving forward on without any opposition for years. 80% of Louisiana's Republicans uncontested, 50% of Tennessee Republicans who kicked out the two Justins uncontested, 40% Georgia, 35% Florida. In 24, actually something changed. And we have started to see people figure out that not only do state houses matter, but bringing accountability to extremists who otherwise have been getting just reappointed without opposition is a really important part of changing the long battle for democracy. So I love the fact that in Florida, there was not a single uncontested Republican in the Florida State House. In North Carolina, where there's a young chair doing a great job, she got elected chair, and months later, North Carolina went from like 25 uncontested Republicans in that state house to 2. Arizona, I visited there about 3 weeks ago. There's not a single district in Arizona that does not have at least one Democrat running. They have multiple candidate districts running in that district, including very red parts of Arizona. So the good news is that we're starting to see people figure out we're not going to have a long-term gain for democracy unless we start really focusing on state houses and we don't just run in the places that we're most comfortable running or that we think we can win. We run everywhere. Because running everywhere brings accountability to extremists who otherwise never face it. If all you worry about is a primary and there's no one knocking on doors in your general, you're going to be an extremist. You're going to vote for the craziest abortion law possible because it wins you the primary, and there's no general that ever holds you accountable. So running everywhere in a way that, again, that is starting to happen is healthy as a matter of accountability in these state houses that attack democracy. But if you're Kamala Harris, having a candidate in every district in Florida is great news. Having a candidate in every district in Arizona is wonderful news. Having a candidate in every North Carolina district is great, or all but 2. So the good news is we're starting to see that. Long term, beyond this election, we also need to start, and I know you raise money to do this, we need to start also providing more and more support to candidates running in harder areas. It's not a zero-sum game. I was in Arizona. I mentioned I was in Prescott, Arizona. This is the home of Barry Goldwater, very conservative area. I was there 3 weeks ago. The Attorney General of Arizona, who recently won that race, she won in 22, was there as well. And why was she in Arizona, this very conservative part? She was there to thank them. As their Attorney General, she has now indicted Rudy Giuliani, Mark Meadows, about 12 other people for trying to steal that Arizona election. Finally, accountability for what they tried to do in Arizona. She only won her Arizona Attorney General race by 380 votes. That area of Arizona, people ran really hard in districts they pretty much knew they couldn't win. They knocked on thousands of doors. They handed out lit everywhere, including her lit. And she thanked them because she was saying, if you hadn't have run here the way you did, I would have never gotten the 380 votes it took to win. So it's a really good lesson on how when we start to think about running everywhere, we start to support candidates with more support. They're not going to have nearly the amount of a swing district, but enough to have the mailers, enough to do the work that gets the vote out, that increases turnout, that gets the message out. It not only affects that area and gets Democrats in that area motivated, it actually affects turnout, up to including attorneys general and this year, potentially Kamala Harris or a U.S. Senate race. So we're starting to see that. And one of the things I've been trying to do that Ann is so kind to be part of, we need to start creating more infrastructure that supports candidates running in tough districts. In the past, one reason no one runs is because they're basically left with the impression that no one cares. They don't get their calls returned. No one supports them. There's not a lot of institutions that give them support because they're focused on the 5 or 6 candidates that seem to be most likely to win. So I and some others have created organizations. Mine is called Blue Ohio, where we crowdfund support from 1,000+ people. It raises 6 figures of dollars, hundreds of thousands, and we actually give those dollars. We don't keep a penny of it. In sort of reverse order, hardest districts first. Because if we don't start to show people that in tough districts there's support for them, no one's going to run. And so some good news amid everything else is we have to start focusing on state houses. We have to start focusing in tougher districts. And we are starting to see some momentum building for that. It's not where it needs to be, but it's getting there. And again, when the other side's front line and their attack on democracy are these state houses, in the heart of where they're doing the most damage are the rural districts that we haven't even been competing in, but where they've been doing most of their damage, like what led to Dobbs, like other things, censorship. It's all going through rural districts and state houses that we have not even bothered running. And the good thing is that's changing, and it started to change this year. The other big thing in Ohio is an example of this. When you think about their battle, and then I'm going to open up to questions, their battle is anchored in state houses. But the other institutions, if you think about it sort of concentric circles, state house for them is the key. A gerrymandered state house is where most of what they want to do gets done in all these states. But then they also care a lot about the institutions that can either hold state houses accountable or be lapdogs for those state houses. And that's when you start to see other offices really matter. Secretaries of state, obviously. But Supreme Courts of states, again, a kind of office that we've overlooked for too long, that they understand a independent court is a huge threat to a gerrymandered state house. In the last month, we've seen a Utah Supreme Court, which is independent, all Republican appointees, but independent in its structure, strike down an effort to undermine gerrymandering. To undermine districting reform. We've seen in South Carolina, a court struck down, an independent court struck down a universal voucher program for violating the separation between church and state in South Carolina. So when you look at their strategy and where we should focus, other institutions that can hold and bring checks and balances and hold accountable state houses become very important to them. So they better be very important to us. And right now in Ohio, other states like North Carolina, these other races like state Supreme Court races end up being in the battle for democracy much more important than, again, we've typically considered, because we've thought it all as a federal sort of battle as opposed to a state level battle, which is really where the base is. So we in Ohio, for example, have 3 Supreme Court races up right now. We could flip the court if everything goes well. These are tough races. They've changed the rules on us, but we're working very hard there. So just big picture in the last 26 days, to the extent you're giving, putting in time, and I put out a Substack the other day. I'll share my Substack in case anyone wants to sign up. Almost everything I do is unpaid. You'll be glad to know. I put out, like, here are ways that you could think about helping in these final days that are consistent with the broader strategy for democracy. You know, at this point, I think it's fair to say that the U.S. Senate races are, they've got the money they need one way or another. But your dollars to help state house races, Supreme Court races, issue races like issue 1 in Ohio, where we have a chance to end gerrymandering, all those are still places where I think volunteering and supporting with dollars could, and I know you're doing your own fundraising on this, could all still help these sort of democracy intense races that often don't get nearly the attention of the other races. So I'll stop talking so we have time for questions, but that's a little bit of an overview of where things stand. And so just remember the big picture of democracy. Yes, we must beat Donald Trump, but the real battle, but as we did in 2020, but we didn't win almost anything else. A true victory for democracy is winning up and down the ballot in a year like this. Thanks, everybody. Look forward to questions.
Thank you very much, David. So for questions, you'll use the reactions button, the raise hand feature. You can click reactions, a little smiley face at the bottom, and choose raise hand. And then I'll call on you, and you won't be able to unmute yourself. You'll have to wait till I request you to unmute. David, thank you very much for that. You mentioned that candidates are not getting, we've got to give candidates support down ballot, obviously something we're working on as well. But you said support after talking about donations. So what beyond donations can we do at this late stage? We've given as an organization, I think, over $8,000 recently.
Right.
We've also all given individually. What can we do beyond contributing at this late stage? What is most helpful?
I think giving time. So right now, as others have said, the most important voters are not the ones right in the middle. It's the voters who are deciding whether to vote or not at all. And to the extent beyond giving, to the extent you have time to do phone banks or door knocking, the best way, if you write postcards, wonderful. People have been writing those for a long time. In a few weeks, postcards the expiration on them being relevant will end. If you're able to put in some time, and I would do it through, pick one of the states out there that you're hitting at multiple levels. It could help win a state house. It could help win state house seats, like in North Carolina or Pennsylvania. It could help win a Senate race. Doing door knocking, doing phone calls to get the vote out. This is going to come down to that. Now, here's the one of the things that keeps me optimistic, and I did something on this today. I'm going to try and find some of these to share. We have, believe it or not, amid all the ups and downs and debates and polls and all that, since Dobbs, we have a hell of a winning streak for democracy. Kansas, the referendum, November of 22, we win all these races. You all know the normal history. When we're in the White House, you normally get crushed in the midterms. We didn't only not get crushed, we won big in Arizona. We won big in Pennsylvania. We flipped state houses for the first time in 50 years. We hadn't flipped a single state house in 50 years when we had the White House. We flipped Pennsylvania's. We flipped Michigan Senate and House, giving Gretchen Whitmer a trifecta. We flipped the Minnesota Senate, giving Walz a trifecta. Then we win the Wisconsin Supreme Court race in April. We win Ohio's democracy battles twice. We flipped the Virginia State House in November of 23. I was with you guys shortly before. So, and then we win special elections from this, which is Santos district. We flip that one. We flip an Alabama district, very Trump district, after that IVF decision. The point is, we're on a hell of a winning streak. And we're on that winning streak, and it's continued all the way through. Completely ahistoric, overperforming the polls. Why? They're too extreme. People have seen that, especially if they see the extremism on things like Dobbs and freedom. And very simply, we've had more energy. We've showed up to the polls with more energy. If we can keep doing that, to answer your question, for 26 days and have the grassroots activists that have been helping in all those races, and my guess is some of you made calls for the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, and some of you made calls for the others. If we can keep that energy and bring it here for 26 days, and you all can do that, that's a huge part of what will lead to victory on November 5th.
Thank you, David. I'm going to turn it over
Just keep
to
the winning streak going.
Ann. Is there anything you want to draw attention to before I turn it over, call on Jackie to ask a question?
Why don't you ask the questions first, and then I will repeat much of what David said, but in different words.
Sounds good. Jackie, you're up. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thank you. Miss David, I really appreciate you. I follow you on, Twitter, formerly, whatever, and I just really appreciate your insights, and I've learned so much from following you, so I really appreciate it. I wanted to ask you about Proposition 1 and sort of where you think it is. I know there's been a lot of issues with like the language and trying to confuse people.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm just wondering where you think things are with that.
David,
So it's funny, issue 1 in Ohio is the issue that would, like Michigan a couple of years ago and other states, get the politicians away from the districting process because they have proven for years they will never follow the rules. They will cheat, they will rig districts for themselves. And this is the one that finally does that. We have one of the worst gerrymandered situations in the nation. And here's what's funny. This is sort of full circle for me. Believe it or not, I had never written a book until I decided, because I ran for an office, state auditor, that if I had won, I'm going to put up a whiteboard on issue 1 just so people can see a Substack. If you want to follow my Substack, go to this one, and you can follow me there. But this is about issue 1. My first book was literally a novel about gerrymandering, because when I ran for statewide office, no one knew what the heck I was talking about. So I thought I'll write a novel about it and convince people through an exciting story that gerrymandering is terrible because there's no awareness. Now, for those of you aspiring novelists out there, know that that's the worst idea ever. No one is going to read a book about, no one's going to read a novel about gerrymandering. Well, I figured that out pretty quickly. So I added a Russian bad guy because I'd worked in Russia. And that became so similar to what happened in 16 because my Russian oligarch kind of rigged American elections that the book actually did very well. Not because it was about gerrymandering, because it was about this Russian oligarch rigging American elections. The point is, I've been fighting this gerrymandering battle forever. And I wrote a novel because no one knew anything about it. Well, here's the good news. People know everything about it now. They hate it. They hate it so much that Republicans have figured out they hate it. So to your question, what have Republicans done? They are literally gaslighting the state. Voting yes on issue 1 will end gerrymandering and get the politicians away from the process and instead put a panel of 15 citizens, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, 5 independents. They will draw the maps. The Republicans know that people want that. So they have, this is how broken Ohio is, and this is sort of what's happening in other states. I'll put another Substack up. They wrote ballot language because they control the ballot process. They wrote ballot language that makes it appear that voting no is how you stop gerrymandering, and voting yes will lead to gerrymandering. It's literally the opposite of what it does, and it's absolutely gaslighting. Now, the Supreme Court of Ohio, which they also now control, is so crooked that they said, we agree with that language. So why are they doing this? Because they know that the citizens of Ohio cannot stand gerrymandering. And they are literally trying to convince people to vote no, who want to end gerrymandering, to vote no, when no is what will actually lead to a gerrymandered status quo. So what we have to do and what we're working to do is make sure long before people show up and see this misleading ballot language that they've already figured out in their minds, we're voting yes. We get it. Now there's some good news. I mean, it's literally, it is the most dishonest abuse of power I can remember to have ballot language say the opposite of what the thing is doing. They kind of did this though last year with the issue on reproductive freedom. They rewrote the language in a way that was not quite this misleading, but pretty close. The good news is the people figured it out, and the result was pretty much exactly the polling on whether or not people were pro-choice. So people did decide before they got to the poll, the polling place, how they were going to vote. If we can achieve that this year, to your question, I think it should pass. The polling's been pretty good on it. That's why they're trying to confuse people. And if it passes, it will be a sea change. But one of my concerns is the court, as I described, was willing to allow manipulated ballot language to stand. One of the key messages we're trying to get out there is if you support issue 1, you better vote for the 3 Democrats for justice, because this court will be the one that will be ultimately interpreting issue 1. And I don't trust the current court to do anything but politicize it. But overall, it's good reform. I think its time has come. People see it. And the reason they're literally having to gaslight is because they're desperate, because they know if people actually, if the will was reflected in the vote, this thing would pass. So they're trying to sort of scuttle it by confusing people. I don't think it will work, and I certainly hope it won't work. It's going to take a lot of hard work, though, to make sure that we get where we need to get with it. But thank you. It's I would say in the entire nation, it's one of the most important issues on any ballot, because people ask me all the time, why is Ohio red when it was blue? We are more of a rigged state than a red state. We have horrible voter suppression, and we have horrible gerrymandering. And they did it after Obama won Ohio because it scared the hell out of them. And they've been rigging us ever since. And if we can unrig our state house and end gerrymandering, we can start to claw Ohio back to being right around the swing state that it was before they really got so aggressive on both gerrymandering and basically suppression of the Obama coalition that turned Ohio blue twice in 2008 and 12.
Thank you so much, David. Dale, I know you have a question. I'll ask you to unmute. You're gonna have to unmute.
Okay, I had two questions. First one is maybe some straight comments on how you would suggest we spend the next 26 days, particularly those who haven't really gotten started yet. I have a few friends in that position. And the second question involves something called deep canvassing. I wondered if you had heard about it. I have
Yeah.
spent some time on it. And that's actually what I'm doing mostly. And I just wondered what you thought about it. You can talk about it if you know about it.
Yeah, no, I think I know the basics, but I like it. I mean, I think our biggest challenge, and I put this in these books, is that we, the late in the game, desperate door knocks of regular voters doesn't address the fact that half the people aren't voting. And unless we start, and when we only desperately knock on doors in the last couple of weeks and we only pick the most regular voters, we're sort of reaffirming to voters that have decided that this doesn't matter to their life, that we don't care about them. So I put in my book sort of a lot of ideas. Deep canvassing is really important. I think getting a lot more organizations to engage their constituents about democracy is also really important. I put all the time that the best communicator of why it's important to register to vote or to vote is often a service provider who's helping someone in a food emergency or someone at the health clinic. And I think a lot of nonprofit organizations, homeless shelters, could be doing a lot more. It's not deep canvassing, but a lot more engagement of constituents that happen to be the constituents who aren't voting as much. So in the next 27 days, some of that may work. But to me, that's the long-term project that needs to be always happening. Consistent engagement of voters who either have been purged and suppressed or who have decided for a variety of reasons, some may be good reasons, that no politician they ever voted for ever did a darn thing for them. Their life is still challenging, so why should they participate? You're not going to change that with a last-minute, door knock. In fact, the last-minute door knock may almost, like I said, affirm they don't really care about me. They just care about my vote. And so that deep canvassing is really important. And I think figuring out I put this in these books I've written, how we can all use our footprint in this world, our networks, our nonprofit involvement. There's so many institutions that could be doing more to lift people back into democracy. And if that was done well, election results would be dramatically different than the fact that so many people in need simply don't vote. So I would say in the final 26 days, any way, and I see here you have a link to volunteering, any way that people can just get themselves into a position of encouraging people to vote, helping people vote, to me, that's the key. And if we do that better than they do it, and by the way, one other thing on this, and this is maybe appeals to your competitive side, I don't think Trump's doing almost any of that. The Trump side, their infrastructure is not strong. He's taking a lot of the money that would have gone to this, and he's using it for his legal bills. They sort of outsourced it to private companies, and I'm starting to see stories that's not going very well. So think about every door you're knocking on or every phone call you're making versus a side that I don't think is doing much of this. And by the way, versus 20, where we didn't do a lot of it because of COVID. We didn't door knock because of COVID. Door knocking is the single best way to turn a voter out. And so I think and I hope that when all the work we're doing is literally in contrast to the Trump side, which isn't doing it as much. I mean, I've had Republicans tell me in Ohio, oh, there's no infrastructure here to get the vote out. They're just hoping they show up. That gives us
talk a little bit about
opportunity.
what deep canvassing is. Can you just tell everybody what deep canvassing is?
Well, you tell me more about. You probably know more about it than I do.
Okay, well then basically the idea, and I won't take a lot of time, is that you actually tell a story from why you vote, and you elicit a story, and you spend at least 15 minutes, if not longer, really connecting with the person. Right. Then you do your voting plan, and then you get them to vote. So in other words, right. It's a slow process, but it is effective.
You're listening, yeah. By the way, one of the things back when I was a candidate, technology can be great and all the data can be great, but I worry it eliminates the exact conversations you're talking about. We hyper target. We key in on the voters who we know show up every time. We're working through our little list of numbers to push, right? And what I used to do as a candidate because we didn't have all these techniques and tactics, I would knock on every door. I didn't care how much you voted. I didn't care what party. And I would always start out by asking them about themselves. And not only did I think, build a good impression, and I finished first out of 30, my first time ever, partly because I did that so often. I also learned so much by having it start with them telling me, and it made me a better official. And I worry that and I learned a lot because I was going also to doors of people who didn't agree with me. Now, I think some of them I convinced to vote for me, but I do think, and this is where when it's not the final couple weeks, where of course you're going to the regular voters for the most part, that kind of deep canvas approach, the real conversation. I mean, my staff would literally get worried because sometimes I'd be invited into the house and I'd be sitting on someone's couch for an hour. One guy, I looked at a burrito in his hand. Clearly, I looked excited about it. The next thing I know, I'm in his kitchen and his wife's making me a second burrito for me. But I think that kind of interaction is so important long-term. And sometimes I worry that the hyper data and hyper targeted world we're now are kind of eliminating those. And for people who don't vote as much, it's that kind of conversation, I think, is the far better way to get them to see, hey, someone actually cares enough to talk to me. Maybe I will think about voting after all. Thanks for doing that. And thanks for the explanation.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, David. Jackie, you're up one more time.
You. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you was the last presidential election, I know that student IDs were accepted, that were
Yeah.
an acceptable form of ID, and I see that this year they are not. And I'm wondering how you think that's going to impact the election as a
In
whole.
Ohio or
No, in Ohio.
yeah, man, you're hitting all my like sore subjects. They have been so one of the things I write about this in my book, in my nothing bothered them more than the number of out-of-state college students going to school in Ohio who voted for Obama in 2008 and 12. They view that, despite decades of Supreme Court precedent, as somehow illegitimate. Why are these kids from the East Coast who go to Kenyon and Oberlin and Ohio State, why are they voting here? Oh, the answer is because the Constitution says they get to. They're a resident. Ever since 8 and 12, the Republicans in Ohio, they've been going after every element of the Obama coalition. Black voters, younger voters, poor voters, the wonderful coalition that led to a pretty decisive win for Obama. They've been targeting it through purging, through early vote. But young voters, they have had a big target on their back ever since, because it's a big number, about 100,000 out, quote unquote, let's call them, they're in state when they're here, but they came from another state. They first attacked them they literally tried to say to colleges, if you give those students the identity, the papers, like the utility bill that allows them to vote in Ohio, we will make you charge them in-state tuition, meaning we will penalize you financially for helping students vote here. It's awful. To their credit, the colleges and universities said, you do whatever you want. We're going to help our kids vote here. And what was ironic about that is the minute it became clear that the colleges and universities were not going to back down, that obviously created massive incentive for kids to vote here because they're about to get a big break in their tuition. So the minute that became clear, the State House said, okay, forget that idea. We don't want that. The second thing they tried to do was to say, if you register to vote in Ohio, if you don't update your driver's license and you don't update your driver's registration in 30 days, you've committed a misdemeanor. They were trying to get young people to not register here by adding a bunch of hoops and a potential criminal sanction. To his credit, after a whole lot of noise made by me when I shared the party, young voters, college voters, including college Republicans, we blitzed his office with phone calls and protests. John Kasich vetoed that bill. To his credit, it was a complete voter suppression bill against young college voters. So the third thing they did, which they have succeeded, is adding the nation's most strict photo ID. And it involves having a driver's license in Ohio that's not expired. And they know full well that young people don't drive as much. And they know full well that if you're a kid from Connecticut going to school in Ohio, you're probably not going to get an Ohio driver's license. And there are other ways you can get IDs, but I think they know that that's, so my worry is that's going to work to some degree. Now, it also throws, there are about 900,000 Ohioans without a driver's license. Others are getting caught up because their license is expired. Now, some will have passports, but we have a brutal photo ID. But to your point, this is clearly, to me, was more about young voters than anybody else. They've been after them for 10 years. So I've been working with a group called Vote Riders and others to try and explain the new rules, to try and get people to vote. But my worry is there will be some drop in those voters because of what they've done. And it's just a reminder that this is, I wish it weren't the case. This is a very, very cynical, I think of Jim Crow style attacks on the voters that they know that if they came together like they did to Obama would be a majority. So they're literally chopping away at that majority in many ways. And one of the ways is to keep young voters from voting through a much stricter photo ID. And no, student IDs do not count. It's very narrow set of IDs that count. And young people don't drive as much. So they don't have licenses. And if they have a Connecticut license, that doesn't count anymore. It used to be they could show up with a utility bill or a document from the university saying that they go there, here's their residence hall, that's all they needed. No longer does that count. And to me, they're the biggest victim of that new voter ID law. It's a really sobering story.
Jackie, thanks for hitting the sore points for David there.
Yeah, exactly.
And David, thanks for responding so well. So you mentioned, I don't see their hands up, and folks, if you do have a question for David, please use the reactions button. It's a smiley face down at the bottom of your screen. You can click raise hand, and then I'll call on you and ask you to unmute. David, you did mention earlier about giving support, and I asked you about it. But also, I've noticed that we've got the DCCC, we've got the National Democratic Legislative Committee, both of which seem to, given all the grassroots organizations that have popped up, seem to focus mostly on defense rather than offense. And so you've got Blue Ohio, and you specifically said you're focusing, you're giving to some of the tougher races out there, the toughest races you can find, that sort of thing. Is there room, and do you think there could be structural commitment to that sort of, running a good offense in the Democratic Party, or is that going to be better filled by all the various grassroots?
That's a great question. So I finally found what I was looking for. This Substack is sort of it's a little bit about the winning streak I talked about, but it also lays out places people can give if they still want to give. The Supreme Court races I mentioned. There's a wonderful group called the States Project that helps do different states. Here's so my overall view, I really like the way you framed that question. The good news is there's a grassroots infrastructure that's building, that's doing what we're talking about. The States Project is one of them. The States Project picks the 5 or 6 state house races in a state somewhere where we can gain power. Even if it's sort of a redder state, they will help you find the state house races, let's say North Carolina, that could end the gerrymandered supermajority that Republicans have in North Carolina. So I put that in the link. The good news is there is a growing, more grassroots-based infrastructure that's doing what I mentioned. The bad news is it's sort of been viewed as, I wouldn't even call it the JV. It's like the middle school team versus the varsity of the DCCC and the DSCC. The DLCC is the legislative one. It's actually catching up and doing a lot better than it was. But here's the good news, and this is going to sound like I'm name dropping, but I say this because I think it says something. About a year and a half ago when I was on, that's right, I thought you might have had a giving circle, and you'll see that on here, my last call to everybody was go to the States Project. I'm looking at the comment here from Karen Key. Go to the States Project page. You'll see races to give to in Pennsylvania and other states. So that's great that that you have that. I was on Morning Joe about a year and a half ago, and I got a call about a day after. I was saying some of the things I talked about here. and it was a call from a 202 number. And I pick up and they're like, "Hi, Mr. Pepper. This is the vice president's office. Is this the number to reach you on?" I said, "Well, yeah, it is." "Okay, thank you." And then they hung up. And 2 weeks later, I get a call from, "Hey, the vice president wants to talk to you. Do you want to wait?" I'm like, "Of course." And Kamala Harris and I talked for the next 15 minutes about her saying, "I saw you on Morning Joe, and what you were saying is absolutely right. We have to focus on these state house races that we've overlooked for too long." And she'd have to make and I knew her because of Ohio stuff from when she was running. She did not, that was not some staff member saying, "Hey, you should watch this come Morning Joe and call him." Believe me, no one said that to her. She saw it and she thought, "I agree with this." And she wanted to call and tell me that. So the bottom line is, and you all know this, the real head, and I'm a good friend of Jamie Harrison, so he would agree with him, but to say the real head of the Democratic Party is the president, if the president is a Democrat. They're the ones who set the direction, and the chair generally defers to the direction. To have Kamala Harris, knock on wood, if she wins in 26 days, be the head of the Democratic Party, having called me up out of the blue to say, "I agree with, we need to put more in the state houses." And you might have seen it, Bo, the other day, she directed a lot more money to DLCC. I don't know if you saw that. I think we have someone who, because she kind of came out of California politics and not only federal politics, and if you watched after Dobbs, she didn't just go around and say, "Elect more U.S. senators" after Dobbs. And I told her this on the phone call, she met with state houses all over the country after Dobbs. If you Google it, you'll see that. She had meetings with groups of state reps from all these states. So I think the good news is we have to scale up this sort of grassroots activism and grassroots state house focus that does exist. It's got to go from like 8th grade or middle school and JV to being varsity. It's got to be seen as core mission, just like the DCCC. But with Kamala Harris there, I actually think there's a chance that could happen, because her very natural call to me suggested she sees it and she understands that only doing a few of the national federal committees, again, important, necessary, but not sufficient. I think she really sees that.
Thank you. That's a really reinvigorating answer. And given how far a dollar goes on a state race, state house race, or a judicial race, that's incredible. Next up, we've got a question from Elizabeth. Elizabeth has chaired our Blue Wave Task Force. She's chaired the DC Democratic State Committee's Blue Wave Task Force.
Oh, really?
Oh, no.
I'm no longer.
Yes.
Take it away from me because I was doing too much good.
No, Elizabeth was focused on state houses, and unfortunately, the state party in DC does not quite agree.
Yes.
But Elizabeth, what is they'd rather focus on DC and the president. Elizabeth, your
Yeah, so I just really appreciate you highlighting the work that States Project is doing. Sort of comment, I hate to be like that, more of a comment than a question person, but one of the reasons it still is great to donate to them is because last time they also helped with a lot of the legal battles. And I think you probably know more about this and maybe you can speak more on it. But, you know, I'm seeing a lot of resources from the GOP go to building the legal battles that they're anticipating. They've been fighting them pre-time. I know we're focused on Pennsylvania right now, no offense to Ohio, but you know, this is a place where the state house immediately takes their seats. This is a place where we know Trump tried to steal the election last time. We know that the state house in Pennsylvania bears this story forward in a very dramatic way and that we cannot lose. And so I know that they're doing that work too. If you want to, I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I think it's a really compelling story.
Yeah, no, I think that's, by the way, no offense taken. I think I love in many ways, the best win of the 22 cycle was the Pennsylvania State House flipping. I was on I don't know if you know the actress J. Smith Cameron. She runs a giving circle. She's from, she was Emmy nominated from Succession. And her giving circle was basically a bunch of like opera singers and actresses and all that. And I was on the call when they voted. I always do these sort of stage project. I'm kind of I just cheerlead on these calls and say, you guys are on the right track. And I love that they voted for Pennsylvania as their state, knowing that I think it was either 10 or 12 seats they had to pick up. And the fact that they flipped that many, again, in a midterm where we're supposed to lose was awesome. But we don't want to lose that. So it's great that you're doing that. And as you said, you know, that affects Casey and that affects the presidency, the fact that we have good candidates in those districts. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be all hands on deck. States Project. By the way, the other thing States Project does very well is they push these candidates to go door knock. They tie together money with a door knocking challenge. And again, that goes to the impact that's helping turn out at all levels. It helps the state house. And so they're as good as it gets. They're as good as the best practices exists. That's why I'm always pushing. I literally travel around the country to help them. I don't know as much about their legal work, but obviously it's going to be all hands on deck between, you know, the big law firms and lawyers like Mark Elias and States Project, other organizations. It's pretty clear that Donald Trump has some pretty dark plans building to challenge, to make things harder. And yeah, we need to all be ready for that. And to the extent they're building infrastructure to do that, that's the costs of that are going to add up very quickly. And you know, I don't know, I can't get in the mind of these crazy right wingers. But if they don't think they can win straight up, which is why they gerrymander, it's why they're lying about issue 1 in Ohio. They know that in many cases they're for unpopular things. It's why they're trying to change ballot initiatives. Well, another way you win knowing that you're for unpopular things is you just try and suppress the vote before, during, and after the election. And that's clearly part of their strategy. So helping with that legal work is really, really important.
Yeah, just to add to that,
Go ahead.
you know, the Republicans have been fighting the mail-in ballot fight in Pennsylvania. We've had some good news on that front. You know, the ballots are going to be counted. Fun fact, Biden didn't win Pennsylvania until the Saturday following the election. And during that period, the state house, the people that won the state house, the GOP state house members were madly fighting to overturn the vote of the electorate. So it's really just a very important thing. And to your point, this weekend, I'm going up with our Capitol Stonewall Dems who are here. We're going to go knock on doors with Anna Thomas, who is one of the candidates in Pennsylvania who's already knocked on thousands of doors. She's a young Dem, she's a scientist, she's a chemist. But what's exciting is she's already knocked on the doors. So, you know, canvassing I only do is kind of like it's nervous energy exercise for me. I know that I'm not out there convincing anyone, but we are giving them get out the vote information. And that's really crucial in Pennsylvania because it's decided county by county, which we know is a voter suppression tool. So thank you so much. I'll go off mute.
Thank you. That's great you're doing that. That's great you're doing that.
Thank you,
Yeah, I'm
Elizabeth.
glad I thought I pitched the Stage Project. That's great that you've got one going.
So yeah, another interesting thing about Pennsylvania is that the reason why the ballots are counted so late, of course, is because the legislature wanted to sow the destabilization into the results.
Yes, it's so frustrating. I mean, so Ohio is so bad on voting in so many ways, but it was a Democratic Secretary of State who began this. They process all the votes, early votes, because we get a massive amount of early votes. They process them as they come in. And so our early vote is announced at 7:45 p.m. And they push the tabulate button at 7:30 on election night, and the results are announced by 7:50, 8 o'clock. So it's clearly not only possible, but relatively easy to have your early votes come out first. If a state isn't doing that, it's because they don't want to do it. And right now, the reason they don't want to do it is because they want to create this opportunity to meddle. And I know the Pennsylvania Republicans have been doing that. But Ohio, literally, if you watch Ohio election results, the Democrats are always ahead by 8 o'clock, which leads to this kind of warped view of what's happening. It's because the early votes are the first things announced. And if Ohio can figure it out, everyone should be able to figure it out.
Amen. All right, next question we have from Hernan Aveledo, who he's unmuted. Here we go.
Hi, good afternoon, or good evening. The issue that I want to bring up is not really urgent, so I don't want it to take up time because the emphasis now is on winning the election. But I would like the opportunity of talking more with you about voter ID laws and related aspects.
Yeah. What my views on them?
No, I would like to see when we could discuss this further. Yeah.
I'm happy to do that. I mean, I teach election law. Voter ID is one of the most frustrating things because the whole thing is absolutely reminiscent of what led from Reconstruction to Jim Crow. There was not a single photo ID law in the nation in Bush v. Gore or Bush v. Kerry. It didn't exist. And it all started because a case out of Indiana. Indiana added a photo ID law. And the Supreme Court said, even though Indiana did not show a single instance of voter fraud in person in the history of Indiana, the court said, well, it's still okay to create a photo ID. And so now they're everywhere. And sadly, they've successfully marketed it. They're popular. Polls suggest that most people, including a lot of Democrats, support it as a way to combat voter fraud, even though the origins of it, there was no in-person voter fraud. Polling off an election by in-person voter fraud couldn't be more difficult. A bunch of people showing up pretending to be someone else at polling locations where the same precinct worker has worked for years. You're, doing it to a scale that could change an outcome. It's an absurd. It would be the worst way you could ever try and intervene in an election or do some election, stealing. But based on that, we now have massive voter suppression from photo ID laws. So it's a very frustrating topic. I can't remember what's in the federal bill on this, but I know there's something on it. It's so out of control that I do think, some states, a gun license, you can vote, but not a student ID. It's all over the map. And my hope is, I can't remember the details, but that part of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and Freedom to Vote Act does do something around photo ID, voter ID. But it really was this, again, it reminds me so much of what went from Reconstruction to Jim Crow, a false narrative of voter fraud leading to very disproportionate and large scale suppression of certain voters. And it's a very depressing story.
Right, but I mean, my position, I come from abroad where having an ID is normal. Everybody has a national ID.
Right.
Why don't the Democrats push for everybody that the federal government would issue an ID to every single citizen? And take the name. So instead of playing defense, no, we play offense. So everybody can have a passport card. We're not inventing an ID; it already exists there, right? The credit size passport card, and give it out for free. Okay, and we've got the distribution network for all the post office and so on, right?
Yeah, I mean that's you could do that, and the states that do have them, the states that do have photo IDs are supposed to have them be available for free, and maybe that's the best alternative given that they're being imposed everywhere. But so I'd be interested. I have to again relook into what's in the federal the laws that are being and the bills have been proposed. But again, in the end, though, the problem is to your suggestion, it's state law, and these people are not trying to. The effort here is not about really combating voter fraud. Let's be clear, it's voter suppression. So they could easily say that doesn't count. Their goal is not a fair system of voting. It's literally been suppression of certain voters. When they got rid of the driver, when they said it has to be an unexpired driver's license, 900,000 Ohioans were wiped out of voting right there. And Vote Riders and others have been trying to catch up to those 900,000 ever since. That's why they're doing it. And so I think that perhaps your idea has some merit, but the state houses, if they thought this would solve the problem, my very cynical prediction is that ID would not count as a valid ID for voting. They'd want something different. That's how they operate. Of course, there's no reason in the world why an Ohio State student ID should not allow you to vote. None in the world. But they don't count because that would help young people vote. So, and then in other states, your hunting license, you can vote. So it could be a solution, but it also, I do never assume that these people are playing straight on these things. This is all about voter suppression.
Thank you, David. That's a really good point. I mean, I could see how, given that the Constitution allocates the running of elections to the states, that a national voter ID might be impermissible, absent separate legislation from Congress. So I want to thank everybody for all the questions. They've been wonderful. And David,
good conversation.
Thank you so much for your inspiring comments. Do you have any closing comments?
No, just like I said, don't let the polls scare you. I don't know what they said today. I don't really care all that much. we got a winning streak, folks. It's ahistoric. It's defying every poll. It's from Kansas to Eastern Ohio to Alabama, special elections in Trump areas. And it's because they're too extreme. Dobbs exposed that maybe more than anything else. It's because we've been turning out the vote more. So anything you can do in the final 26 days, you know, Elizabeth going to Pennsylvania, knocking on doors, others, whatever you can do to contribute to that grassroots energy to get the vote out, that's right now the single most important thing you can do. So keep going. I know you will. I really enjoy getting to know your group. I love that you have a good active States Project Giving Circle going. And then Ann, after and Bo, make sure, let's hope we have a great result. And then in the long game for democracy, nothing stops. So make sure we know what's our plan for 25. What's it look like? And early on next year, we should already be thinking about that. The biggest mistake we sometimes make is, and you guys won't make this mistake, but some do, we sort of think, oh, we won that, we won the battle, we go away for 2 years while they go crush us in state houses. We can't let that happen ever again. So after November, let's keep talking. Thanks,
so much,
everybody.
David.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, David. I'm going to turn it back over to everybody. Yeah, a round of applause as we do virtually. Thank you, David. Ann, I know you want to take us home with some comments on how we can get involved as Ward 3 Democrats.
I want to further push what David is saying about donating and volunteering. And one aspect of that, you all probably heard about vote tripling. You need to help volunteer triple. There are people who have never donated or volunteered before who are excited now. If you reach out to your friends, you will get us more volunteers. We have gotten 15 or 20 new volunteers who aren't Ward 3 Dems members yet, but who are canvassing, writing letters, making phone calls, and a few of them found us on their own, but a huge number came from their friends who told them what they were doing and then said, oh, and then they got interested. So please, one of the easiest things you can do, the least time consuming, is reach out to your friends and ask them to help too. Also, I want to make some comments about the volunteer information. The stuff in the chat is a fraction of what most of you were sent earlier today to our membership, to our special Blue Wave Task Force, to the people who were generous enough to donate last summer to our state candidates. So there's lots more information there. In the short chat document, you've got my email. So if you don't get my email volunteer newsletter, email me and I'll send you more information. But I want to point out that in that document, the very top item is, Dale, what do you call it again for canvassing?
Deep canvassing. Whoa, yeah. Deep canvassing. And I just want everyone to know that it's a lot of fun. I have found it much better than regular canvassing, because with regular canvassing, a lot of times you're kind of running a spiel into, like, saying things at the door and often something that's scripted, that's written for you. This has a script, but you're really connecting with people. And it's quite rewarding. You learn a lot. So, and they also, the organization that I'm working with, CTC, they do a lot of training. We do 3 hours of training and a couple hours in the field. So you really know what you're doing. You're confident. You're with somebody. I think it's quite a rewarding event. And I hope that we actually get some cars going out there, because it, in my opinion, it's one of the most effective things I've done. I've gotten 2 or 3 voters every shift, people who are new to voting. What they've done is they've taken an area of Philadelphia that is highly Democratic, but has people who don't vote. It has like a 20% vote rate. And we're turning these people into voters and helping them get the habit of voting.
Thank you, Dale. Another thing that's in that email is deep canvassing by phone in 4 swing states. I also want to mention, because Elizabeth just mentioned something really, really important that again is something easy we can all do. Get all your friends outside DC, because unfortunately our votes don't matter too much, to vote. Ask them to vote early. If they're putting in a mail ballot, get that in early. It really helps Democrats in several ways. It's good for morale, but even more importantly, when you vote, your name comes out of the voter file. And that means Democrats can concentrate more on low propensity voters and reach more voters. So ask every single one of your friends outside DC to do this. Obviously, swing states are the most important, but all states are important. And I put in, but without a link, something called Blue Voter Guide. Blue Voter Guide lets you know what progressive organizations have endorsed candidates. That means for candidates further down the ballot, people have a clue about who to vote for. And it includes races that are supposedly nonpartisan. So I would push very hard for that. We have a lot of canvassing suggestions for both Pennsylvania, fewer for North Carolina. If you want to canvass someplace else, contact me. I'll help you find the information. All the canvassing options have rides. So do look into them. We've also got phone bank suggestions. The phone bank suggestions are almost all not for candidates. They are to get voters out, to get low propensity voters out, to help people who are confused. This is all really important. We also have some postcard and letter writing, and I will get you how to write for Vote Riders, which is sending out letters helping people with information about IDs. In terms of donations, we have a link in there for two state legislative candidates. Beth Helfrich, who we raised money for before. We're not raising for Sarah Adgerton because she did so well with help from people like us that people in Pennsylvania suggested we give to Christian Luna, who's a young 27-year-old Mexican-American man who's running a fully bilingual campaign. He is not only great in terms of his whole area, getting him out there helps Kamala get votes from young Latino men who are some of the people we're really pushing for. There's also a group in there called NCAPREF. They are one of the major groups in North Carolina that works. It's a Black group that stands for A. Philip Randolph Education Fund. They've been in the community forever. They work 365 days a week. They do community work, and they are a 501c affiliate, did more voter registrations than any other community organization in the state. They did more than half of them. And now they need money for their canvassing, to help with their canvassing. So please, please help with that. And the other link that's in there, but we'll give you some more, is one for a group called A Better Big Sky. The way we are most likely to help Jon Tester win in his very tough race in terms of money is to give to A Better Big Sky, which helps get voters out. Again, it's got groups which work 365 days a year and does community work as well as election work. And I'm happy to give anybody who wants more information, and there is more written information. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann. Does that mean you're taking questions?
Looks like
We
Shelley
are
has
past the hour. All right, Shelley,
Let's
do you have a
ask-
question? I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Shelley, you're still muted.
Okay.
Oh,
Oh, here we go.
can you hear me?
Yes, Shelley, we do.
Oh, good. Quick question. Luna, where is his district in Pennsylvania? Where's it located?
Chester County.
Chester County.
Yeah.
So it's a Philly suburb, right?
Somebody else have better. Elizabeth is saying yes. I don't know my geography.
Okay, no,
very
I'm
well.
just trying to think how long a drive. Okay, that sounds very promising. So there's a focus now on Luna for several good reasons.
For donations, absolutely.
And what about
They-
canvassing?
Canvassing for him is good, but there are other candidates like Sarah Adgerton who are in a district where we want to flip a congressional seat. So if we go to that district where
Yeah, I know.
we're working both for a state house seat and a congressional seat, all of this is good. Every
Yeah.
single door we can knock is good.
Okay,
So the more the merrier.
thank you.
And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Shelley. Elizabeth, you've got a question?
I was just gonna add that I'm literally looking up how far it is, but Chester is literally right across the border. It's just south of Philly. It's next to Kennett Square. If you wanted to plan a little nice weekend, we're canvassing for someone in Chad's Ford, which is right next door. I'm calling it our pumpkin spice latte canvas because it's like they have a pumpkin festival. It's very nice. It's close to Longwood Gardens. So if you need any help planning these things, we have a ton of people going all the time. Reach out. Anne is happy to broker for you. She knows everything. I'm also doing the same thing for Capital Stonewall, so I'm happy to plug you into the same networks. You tell me where you want to go. I will find you a campus going there. There is absolutely no excuse for you not to be doing something with your time to protect democracy right now. So you have no excuses. I'm trying to be nice, but like we have so many opportunities. We are happy to broker them for you. Just reach out, hold up a hand, tell us exactly what you want to do and we'll plug you in. And Anne, you've done such an amazing job. One final thing, every Wednesday, Women's National Democratic Club, if you've got a free Wednesday, hop in. They will do the same thing. They will match you up, with phone calls, whatever. There's always something going on there from now until the election. So we've got stuff locally, we've got stuff nationally, we've got things going on all the time. But there's been no time. We need everybody to get involved right now. And Anne, I cannot thank you enough for putting all these action steps together. But for the record, 2 hours to get to Chester. It's not bad. You can go up in a day. I think most of you know Hugh Allen. Hugh and I have done this a couple times now. Easy day trip if you want, if you have a little more time. I'm doing some weekend trips. So thank you all.
I want to make one last comment. Elizabeth sort of, oh darn, what was I going to say? I had something I wanted to say. Well, I'll put it in writing because I'm tired. But Elizabeth, what did you just say? You said something that sparked my memory.
You're on mute.
There we go. Sorry, I was like, I can't come off mute. Bo's running a very tight ship. I was talking about Chester. I was talking about plugging into opportunities, winning Wednesdays. What do you want? Phone banks. I mean, you've literally named everything that's going on, but also just that you can broker people, that you can set them up with opportunities. Is that what it was?
I know what I wanted to say. I have been begging people in writing to offer to drive canvassers from our group and had very little response. Sandy has been great. He's planned a canvas. He's planning a second one. But we could use more people to drive. I've also been begging people to hold postcard parties or letter writing parties. These are
And
really
hold on,
easy,
I'm gonna
so please help.
stop recording. I'm gonna stop recording if we're gonna be naming volunteers.